I want to welcome you back to another episode of what I branded pivotal, since these interview style segments tackle impactful CPG industry topics and lessons from the business leaders that live it every day. Celsius and PepsiCo, Nutrabolt and Keurig Dr. Pepper, Bloom and Nutrabolt, Noble and TB12. What do these deals have in common besides the fact that you've seen me kind of break down each one of them in content on my channel? The only law firm in the world dedicated exclusively to the CPG community, Giannuzzi Lewendon. While insights from those massive deals are weaved into our conversation, I took the law firm's partner, Ryan Lewendon, through my gauntlet of A to Z CPG land impactful topics. To be honest, this is the type of conversation for those really into the CPG industry. Ryan and I talk about how integral the divine triad of CPG is, plus the importance of maximizing strategic optionality by building the brand with intention, both from organizational and customer facing variables. We also ponder what the future of CPG looks like when it's data driven with layers of artificial intelligence. Moreover, we talk about the good, bad, and ugly around the strategic partnerships involving celebrities and the creator economy. Finally, we take that a step further and talk about today's kingmakers, algorithms, and why the rise of social commerce has its possible downsides within functional CPG product categories. But without further delay, here is the recent conversation I had with my good buddy, Ryan Lewendon. I always appreciate the opportunity to chat to another strategic thinker that has chosen to apply this valuable mindset in kind of that, like, I guess you could call it like the inch wide and mile deep type of scenario. I mean, I think that that's really the whole basis for my consulting agency that I built or started, 12 years ago. It's been this, like, I guess, continual, never stopping, relentless, like, pursuit of, like, trying to master every little piece of the industry. I always, like, say my side of it's a lot of, like, functional CPG, but, like, I love to get in the dirt. I love to be in the clouds. I love to be, dirty while I'm in the cloud. I like this whole kind of thing going on here. And I apologize for going off on a tangent there. But thank you, Ryan, for taking time out of your schedule, joining me. I'm excited about our conversation.
Yeah, Josh, thanks so much. I'm excited too. I think like your business and mine have so much overlap and similarities in that, inch wide, mile deep. You nailed it. Like, hey, we're both CPG. We both get involved in the companies. We both like being a little bit more than what we're offering to the core sort of skill set, adding sort of the additional value adds, whether it's insight, strategy, connections, sounding board. So yeah, I'm glad we're chatting, man. We've known each other for a while, and I've, admired what we've been doing from afar. So really pumped to be on the show.
Yeah, agreed. So let's talk, thinking about some of the recent deals, and maybe we can kind of use some of those to at least frame the conversation. But I'm thinking about, I don't know, there's this, like, I hate to use the word, I've been on this big kick lately of these, like, secular religious, like, connections of, like, brands and this weird, like, in my brain. But I think about, like, either the holy trinity of, like, or the divine triad, I guess, of, like, CPG. And I think about that in terms of, like, extremely strong margins, or I guess a path quickly to that, or some, I guess, clear path to that. Definitely a high frequency of use. And then in terms of finding your community, I know a lot of times people say, is that, product market fit? But I think it's past that. I think it's like, have you found your tribe? Have you found your community? And I think if you can find those three things, you tend to be doing quite well, or at least have the highest probability of doing well right now. And you could see that across a lot of the recent deals, both from, like, large, I guess, acquisition or strategic partnership type things, but also just who's getting funded right now. It seems like if they are hitting on those three things, they seem to be doing better than a lot of their contemporaries.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, I think you nailed that. Like, I'd say from a macro level, the environment for funding has become exponentially more difficult, right? Over the past, call it 10 years, and we went from a thesis where, hey, grow your top line, double it every year. Don't worry about the bottom line so much. Just get market share, market share, market share. And then we kind of moved to one where it's like, hey, you've got to prove, you got to get market share, but you also have to show profitability, right? You have to show staying power. You have to show profitability. And for somebody who's like starting a business, becoming profitable is so daunting, right? Because almost no companies when they launch are profitable. Almost none. A few, but almost none, right? And what you just laid out, like those three characteristics, like are what somebody starting a company should be shooting for, right? Hey, do I have a good margin? Can I show a use case that's high? And am I able to tap into a rabid fan base, right? Am I able to tap into someone that's gonna like obsessively use my product, gonna really identify with it, connect to it? And, you know, if I can do that, that's gonna put me in a position where I can generate enough sales, enough income that, you know, I can sort of take it to the next level, whether that's finding funding or in some cases, like, yeah, just growing the company and racing out and not even bringing in funding, right? And, you know, I would say all three of those things, even on an earlier side of things, like it's hard to find margin to start, depending on what your category is, right? Like energy's got a better category than water, you know, and beauty's got a better sort of margin than than apparel or RTDs or whatnot. But so it's all relative, but still maximizing your margin is so tough off the bat. But like thinking about ways to do that, having a plan on how to do that, right? From the get-go. It's not something you had to do 10 years ago. Like, right? Like you could just kind of come up with the idea, get it funded, and then figure it out. But today, not only just start your company, but like to get your company funded from a Series A or whatnot, you've got to have those answers. You got to have them ingrained, and you got to have that plan. I tell people, I worked with Body Armor and Mike Rapoli for years, and worked with them through the sale of Coke. What was so impressive to me about Mike, and he was doing this before anybody else was doing it, was that he called Nick and I to Whitestone and sat and did a presentation for us when he kind of first came into Body Armor, right? And the company was doing probably sub 20 million in revenues. And he said, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to become the number one sports drink. We're going to take down Gatorade. This is why people are going to buy it instead of Gatorade. And this is how we're going to do it. And first, we're not going to take down Gatorade. First, we're going to take down Powerade. Powerade's hanging by a thread. We're going to take all their shelf space. This is a plan, right? We're going to become the number 2 sports drink. And this is our plan to become the number 1 sports drink. And this is our villain. And this is how we're going to take him down. And he had that from day one, right? Like he knew why his product was going to be $1 billion brand and generally how it would get there. And how he got there wasn't exactly how it happened, but like the ethos was there, And I will say that there are people. Well, look, if you're starting a business or you're growing your business, if you can do that analysis, if you can find the headspace to do that analysis and find sort of like that villain, that North Star, and to kind of work your way backwards in terms of strategy, supply chain, your margins, your use occasions, your audience, that is going to put you in such a better position for success later on.
Yeah, I think there's that idea of understanding like why you're doing what you're doing, like have some intention with your moves and kind of model that out and try to figure out where are my opportunities. Also, I think it's always great, especially in CPG, to think about strategic optionality. Like there are points in the road, like you said, like you typically have this end goal, but while you're getting there, there's probably going to be some struggles, some things that, not necessarily that you have to take these harsh right turn pivots, but like things that at least on the strategic map that you're like, you know what, I have some options here. If something hits and I need to take a little bit of a detour, I'm not going to get off track. I might just all of a sudden, open myself up to a little bit more time, or I might need a little bit more of whatever, but at least gives you the option of not necessarily having to fold or to quit or, to have some of those things. And I feel like you had mentioned, maybe I take it for granted a lot of times that like my brain works in these like puzzles or maps or like, I think about those types of things. But I feel like even having a bare bones just structure or framework to that before you go out, especially when you're going out and like raising capital and early on. I mean, I think that we're talking CPG, and I think that one of my most, I guess, I want to call it like heartburns or just like pain points is like when a founder wants to pitch like pre-revenue in CPG, and I know it happens, and I know that some people are going to like, whoa, I'm the outlier or whatever. And I think if you were a successful entrepreneur that had some exit or some really great liquidity event, and you come in and build again, you could probably raise right off the idea of, hey, I'm going to build again. Do you want to join me? But I think for most people, they don't have that option, but you have to go out and sell first. You just got to know if like you could do the basic, like go out to a literally like a farmer's market and like just hawk your goods and see if you could just sell. Like I'd love to see that at least first. But then after that fact, you need to have a vision. You need to have, and I know vision, like, I'm going to take down this category and it's a, $40 billion category. We're not talking that. We're actually talking about like thinking through the steps. Like
Yep.
if then, let's build this out and let's see like where this goes. Because if you thought that through, you're at least directionally appropriately pointed in a direct, and like you have a little bit more confidence that you're like, okay, this person knows, what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. In addition to that, it's like, I mean, as much as people would love to believe that whatever your entrepreneurial journey is going to be like 2 years or 3 years or whatnot, like really people who grow and scale and sell businesses, it's usually like a 7 to 10 year play,
Yeah.
right? When you add in sort of like the early development and all that, even like the biggest successes, the quickest successes are probably 3 or 4. But it's so rare, so you got to be in it for the long haul. But what happens over a 5 to 10 year period is like consumers' tastes and preferences change. Like if you look at like Suja, which is a company I worked with, very early on, they were basically a juice cleanse at first, right? And we had I previously worked with Blueprint and sold them to Hain, and juice cleanses were like all the rage, 2000, I think 11 or so. And, in the course of Suja's growth and its scaling, like that switched. People are like, well, juice cleanses aren't that great for you. There's a lot of sugar in them and we want to move that out. So, you look at the business of Suja today, which is a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal business, but it's not a juice cleanse, right? It's a juice company. It's a functional shot company, right? It's functional blends, but they were able to do that for a number of reasons, but part of that's that optionality, right? Part of it's that they owned much of their manufacturing. So they were able to sort of react quickly and strategically to people's, taste changes. But most people in CPG don't have that option. Most people don't own their supply chain. Most people have to, enter into long-term supply agreements with co-packers, right? Where, hey, sometimes I'm guaranteeing minimums over time, right? Sometimes I have a take or pay, which means that if I don't buy enough of this product from you, I owe you a penalty for doing so. So, and, on the distribution side, right? Like even from a market standpoint, if you are creating a DSD network, right? DSD networks are exclusive to a territory and across all categories, unless you carve certain things out in terms of negotiation. So, if you decide, hey, my route to market is going to be sort of the grocery and all other market, right? And you enter into DSD agreements for large swaths of territories, and you sort of change your mind. You're like, you know what? I'm going to go direct to consumer, or I'm going to go big national chains through distribution centers, right? You might have huge impediments doing so because of the way you have to build your company when you don't have a lot of leverage or the money to give yourself that latitude, right? And I will say I've seen a number of companies live or die based on that optionality in terms of route to market, supply chain, marketing standpoints and whatnot. So, one of the toughest things you can do when you don't have a lot of leverage is build an optionality. But, especially when you're like very early on, and if you have a product that could be lots of different things to lots of different people, and you're not saying, hey, it's got to be this or nothing, trying to do that day-to-day basis with all the agreements as you sort of build your sort of interconnected web of assets, can be long-term one of the most lucrative things for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think because a lot of times when we're talking about like a subject like this, we think about it probably from more the customer facing type stuff. Hey, you used Suja. Like I even think Celsius. They were like very much weight management. All of a sudden, they started to like reposition their business into like more just fitness or healthy wellness energy beverages. You think about a number of different ones like that. You also think just sometimes people build the optionality of like doing platform type brands where like they own a certain space and they can kind of do different forms, or they can do different use of like there's a bunch of these things they can like create in there. And I think a lot of times we think about that type of strategic optionality, and then to your point, the behind the scenes, in the shadows, like the things that you and I probably spend a lot of time, the dirty kind of stuff. You think about just making sure you're okay. Like you said about, is it, DSD type of like the architecture, how you're building that, how are you thinking about that? Because if you do have this big ambitious build, plan, and you eventually get to the point where we're talking about, PepsiCo or KDP, or somebody wants to buy you out or do these types of things, like, did you set those contracts up appropriately? Because all of a sudden that changes the, I guess, attractiveness of it, because all of a sudden your buyouts maybe are more extensive, or there's things that they need to kind of layer on that would take away from maybe your valuation or whatever that is. And obviously there's so many different things to think about that. But I also think, even just the way you set up, your actual business, like, the typical organizational structure, equity structures, like I also think about like trademarks. Like that one to me baffles me, that people don't think through the trademark part, because they just go, oh, this is a great name. And then they just start going into market and they start doing things. And all of a sudden they are like, wait, there's somebody else out there and they're already at like maybe $1 million or something. And they're like, wait a minute, we can't go any further. Now we have to redo our whole business and start from scratch again, because we didn't think through this basic first step of going, do we actually have this ownable name and mark or whatever it is that we have? Like there's things like that it seems like people, I don't know if it's like you're just excited and you're going, but I see it time and time again where like there is at least a little bit of that basic stuff at the beginning, even manufacturing, like own your formulas or own like create those like expectations from the start, because then you don't have to clean up a lot of mess when it's bigger and messier.
Yeah. Look, you're touching on all the stuff I do like pretty much all day for a lot of businesses. So I love talking about this stuff, but it is, I would say that the reason people make mistakes, like deadly mistakes early on, are kind of one of two reasons. One, like you said, just enthusiasm, right? And the other is sort of like bad advice, or from people that are kind of like, look, just do it and you'll fix it later on, right? And that's true in some instances, but it's not true in others. Stuff like your trademark or your recipes, specifications, whatnot. Like if you're at the beginning and you love this name, and there are 8 names that might existing out there that might disqualify you from getting a name, pick another one. Like just pick another one. Like there's no use having to rely on, becoming so big in the market that you get the trademark based on sort of common usage, right? And if you go to a manufacturer and they want to own your recipes and not you, find another manufacturer, just find somebody else. And if you can't make it anywhere else but with this one person, ask yourself why no one else can do it, Yeah. Because like building a business on a faulty foundation, right, means that you might just put a lot of work into doing something, like your whole soul into doing something that somebody else might ultimately economically benefit from, right? I've certainly, I've certainly helped sell companies that when we got to the, that I historically didn't build, but like when we got to the closing table, it turned out the manufacturer owned the recipes and not the brand. And, that luckily in that case, one case I'm thinking of, the deal got done, but you had to pay that manufacturer, tens of millions of dollars more than they ever would have made, right? As a result of not cleaning something up that could have probably been cleaned up for a couple $1,000s earlier on before you were ready to sell the business. So when I work with companies early stage, basically what I'm trying to do is keep them from like making those like fatal mistakes, and for the most part, every industry is a little different. Like in beauty, like it's a little more common for the manufacturer to own the stuff than in food or beverage or anywhere else. But so everything's category to category. It's a little different, but for the most part, there are like best practices, and there are things that a sophisticated investor is going to want to see and an acquirer is going to want to see. And if you can put advisors around you, right? It doesn't have to be me, the lawyer. It can be a founder that's done what you've done, right? But putting someone around you that can say, hey, look, an investor's going to want to see this. So just get it done from the get-go, right? That's going to save you so much time and money and effort later on. And it might actually save your business. It might be the difference between selling the business and changing your life, or, the business going under and you starting over again. So,
Yeah, I think I always used to use the like what you don't know type of scenario. Like there's a lot of things in CPG that I think having people that, again, like an advisor of some stature, again, it doesn't need to be you or I, but like people that have built and have went through some of this stuff, because there are mistakes that you can not make that won't cause you tons of heartache or money or whatever, just by having some smart people in your corner, just trying to give you, hey, here's where these landmines are at. Just don't walk towards there, walk in a different direction or whatever. It's definitely helpful. Thinking about, I think we're talking like founders, and we're talking like, I guess like the start of all this. And again, sometimes you or I have to clean things up later in the way, but like, starting from square one. And I think that this is maybe something that I'm interested in your take on, because it seemed to be has changed recently. I know when I first started out, almost every single person that I talked to that was starting a business, it usually came from some like pain point in their own life, or some like passion point, or something that like they were like, I'm compelled to create this product. I'm compelled to do that. Now, I think over the last couple of years, you still see a ton of that, but I also think you see more people that come in there with this like data driven kind of mindset going, oh, I see this market opportunity, and yeah, I'm passionate about it, but I'm also not really. I just think it's a really great idea. And if I get in there quick enough, I could probably make a good, business out of this thing. And I'm going to continue to kind of use that to fuel my innovation. And I don't I have an idea of like maybe how this all comes back together, but I do think that it's an interesting shift, because you do have founders that are coming in and they're not really coming in from like this love, passion, like connection to something that is like driving every one of their movements, that like, creates like a relentless type of founder. It's more of the, I see an arbitrage and I'm going to go after it.
yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, look, I think that like the social and the direct to consumer type of growth of that industry kind of brought some of that in, right? Because it brought in some of the tech folks, it brought in the data analysts, it brought in so like you kind of brought, I think some of that came from there, right? And you brought in some of that Silicon Valley sentiment to CPG, which one of the things I love about CPG is that it's definitely more tactile, but it's a little bit more emotionally intertwined with like the consumer, because it's something we put in our bodies. It's something that changes us in some ways, rather than like an app on your phone. And look, I've seen people obviously succeed using both. I will say, kind of, I think today, like the founder story of this was like my grandmother's recipe resonates a little less, right? I think today the founder story that works is like, hey, this has solved a problem for me in my life, right? And I'm seeing that narrative play out a little bit more. The data driven sides of things, I think, is an interesting look. I think everybody should be incorporating some of that into their business. The data analytics and hey, where should I open a new market, right? Where are my consumers? Let me do a analysis of the best place to spend money at this time, right? I think if you're not doing some of that, you're at a disadvantage to the people that you're competing with. But look, I think that at the end of the day, the way things are now, right? Like 2018, 19, I wouldn't say this. I'd say like if you just had a pure data play, you came in, you wanted to win, like I would think that, hey, you can still do that, right? Because there was enough money, there was enough activity, you could get sold. The way things are today, like with the deals that are out there and, there's less and less funding, buyers of brands are being a lot more judicious. And they oftentimes want the team to stay in place for some amount of time, right? They want carryover. Like acquirers don't think that they're great or better than founders at doing what the founders are doing anymore. They realize that they're not. They're like, hey, you know what? We're not as good at making a supply chain more efficient per se, right? To some extent, we're not as good as marketing, right? So if we're buying this brand, we want the founding team to stay on for a significant period of time to run it. So if you go in there and you do your diligence and you find, well, the founder is kind of checked out. It was built to sell, it was built to sell in a moment. There's not really passion there. There was just a lot of good data. I do think it's going to turn off investors. I do think it's going to turn off acquirers. Now, look, you don't have to be, I think the founder has to be passionate, or you can be passionate about the company and the product and the sales. Like, you don't have to be an evangelist of the efficacies or the ingredients you're using, but there's got to be this sort of burning desire to grow and scale this business. I've always said the best businesses, to sell are the ones that you grow and never sell, right? It's the ones that are grown with an eye towards, sustainability. Hey, I can keep this forever. It's not something that has a time clock running on it that if I don't offload it, something terrible is going to happen or I'm going to check out. So I do think, look, we've moved, in my opinion, to a much more data-driven, data-centric, business, especially with things becoming more omni-channel today. But I don't think you're ever going to be able to replace the passion and the heart of the founder. And I do think, like, until you get to a certain scale, people want to see that founder story somewhere. They want to go on the Instagram and see who the founder is. And not everybody uses that. And some founders don't use it for various reasons. But where the reasons are, like, I just don't like to put it out there, or like, I want the product to stand for itself. I totally get that and respect it. But I do think consumers, especially when they're trying a new product they haven't seen everywhere, a product they're finding in like a niche or, grocery or market somewhere, they want to be able to like look and see who created this and why, and what they're about, and what they do. It's something I think consumers do inherently these days. So I don't think that's going anywhere over time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that there's the scenario where, if it's data driven without the, I guess, the soul, like that, those stories, like you're just a product, which then, like, even if you have the most, greatest features and you have all this kind of stuff like that, I think it's a transient like advantage. Like, I think because of how quickly people can move to basically, do the same things, low barriers of entry of manufacturing and a bunch of these things, like there's really nothing you can hold on long term there. So you end up getting like that seems soulless to me. That seems like something that, to your point, when it gets rolled up into the idea of an acquirer or something, they're going to go like, this is just a product. And like, do I want to pay these huge multiples for this thing that really I could probably build myself? And why do I need to do this? But what they can't build is a lot of that, like, the brand, I guess. And like, I think about this as like, yeah, the product in CPG needs to be great. And people that listen to me all the time are going to, like, I say this all the time. It's like, that's the entry fee to compete. That's what you have to have as your foundation. But the stories that you can build off of that ultimately ends up being what is the brand. I mean, what is a brand other than stories? I mean, like, really, it's a matter of like, you're building this layered storyline over long arcs, and you're kind of building this specialness, this thing that like people can't copy, because it's really this like complex story that is just kind of like built off of these great products. So I think having like data but no soul is not the good idea. Now having, this soul without data, I think, is the bigger question of like that. That's also maybe not the best thing. I think you could still like achieve something, but I do think, to your point, like you need to have an understanding and a handle of like how to utilize the tools of today. And that is, if it's AI, machine learning, just even like some type of like personalization, data capturing, like, analytics behind like, what does your customer want and what can you serve them that maybe they don't even know they need yet, or whatever that is. And that's not necessarily that you're arbitraging things. It's that you are still within the, problem set that you're trying to solve, and you're getting feedback loops, and you're constantly figuring out like, how do I make things better? How do I make new things that they would want that I didn't know about? Like, I think that's what is the ultimate like kind of combination of like being able to do that thing. I also think there's people that are coming in right off the bat that are thinking like that are going like audience first CPG, this idea that like they're building something, if it's a creator or if it's a celebrity maybe, but it's also like, could just be like, a, really popular blog or a really popular, social media account or whatever that is, that goes like, what does my audience want? What would they really need? And what aligns with me? And then how do I kind of do that? And you already kind of have a lot of that stuff baked in over, like, it's not a soulless approach. It's like you have taken it from a place of power and value over some, data point that you're like, I can, create some spread advantage here that I can get, some monetary benefit from. So I think there's a way to kind of like combine those things. And maybe this is a good transition into talking about just that movement overall, like this idea of like the celebrity packaged goods or creator packaged goods or whatever that is. I know that's probably another one of those behind the scenes, like things that you probably have to account for, because those strategic partnerships have obviously a ton of layers to them. And if you are maybe an operator from the CPG world and you're wanting to like combine yourself with this powerful creator, the celebrity, and you're going to match it up with this best product, and you're going to do all these types of things, there's so many problems that could come up from that. And maybe we haven't seen a lot of them come because this is still maybe a relatively new phenomenon. And I think they're going to start to come out. But I think it's one of those scenarios where a lot of attention, a lot of people are moving in that area because they understand that audiences and community are really powerful, but they also are not looking at the downside because there hasn't been enough of patterns or sequences that have come out that's told them the downside. So I don't know, like, if obviously you are dealing with a lot of that, but has there any been like things that you've seen on your end and you're like, okay, I'm seeing some stuff on here that maybe needs to be accounted for?
Yeah, I mean, like that, the creator stuff, that's something that like has been like ingrained in my practice. Like one of the first things I worked on out of law school was like 50 cents deal for vitamin, back in the day, and Jennifer Aniston's deal for Smart Water at Vitamin Water. And, it's been interesting to see how a lot of that has changed and moved. I think I did that. Then for Vita Coco did the round, like that first celebrity round where you had Madonna and Guy Oseary and Ashton Kutcher in there. And it was like not an endorsement. They were just investors, but they were kind of, they had like, a little bit of kicker to sort of come into the company, and then worked with Kobe when he came into Body Armor. And now sort of like, you're seeing now you've kind of seen, you went through like the A-list celebs, and it's kind of moved down to like, hey, who are these talent or celebs or creators with like we talked about at the top of this, the rabid fan base, the big audience, and if done right, you can, it's phenomenal. Like if you look at like what Dave Portnoy's done with High Noon, right? Or you look at what Mari's done with her brand Bloom, and obviously you look at Feastables and Mr. Beast, right? All people with like different places that they sit in terms of our social consciousness, all very different and all very, very successful, in part because I think the product and the consumer base really lined up, right? It was something that each of them, the product they were working with meant something to them in some way. And it was something that their sort of consumer base was looking to them as a arbiter of taste, right? Or arbiter of purchase. And that's hard to find. I speak, I work with, exclusively clients and companies in CPG, but I speak to people about this type of stuff all the time. And what's so difficult for these companies is like the allure of the star power and the allure of the celebrity is always really intoxicating. So, to get the interest from someone is always like enticing, and it's always something that you want to go down the road of. And it's always something, sometimes you try to make that square peg round hole kind of fit. But, these sort of big time sort of celebrities with big time price tags and big time equity asks, they don't always translate into sales. Like I don't think, people are buying products based off what Tom Cruise is doing these days, even though he's arguably the biggest movie star in the world, right? But I don't think people are necessarily buying things based off what he's doing these days. Someone with a podcast and a much smaller audience might turn into a much bigger return on investment than an A-list movie star these days. So finding that match between your brand, the talent, and then their consumer base, right? Like, hey, can I match my talent? But like, is their consumer base going to align with my product? And are they going to buy this product? And are we going to mesh those over? That's like where all the magic is today, in my opinion, in the creator sort of led, assisted, co-founded brands. And I have seen a lot of them, the ones that don't work, you don't really, really notice because they don't make a big splash, but there are lots of them that come out and, they come out and for one reason or another, doesn't resonate. Ideally, I always think about like Skinny Girl Margarita as like the perfect sort of creator, like founded brand, right? David Cambar founded this with Bethany Frankel, and like story is they put in a little bit of money. David funded it with a relatively small amount of money for spirits company, but he was like, hey, I got marketing for free, right? Like I got so much marketing, I got millions of marketing for free because it was on the Real Housewives. She incorporated in everything. She lived it and breathed it. And it was exactly what the people that followed Bethany Frankel at the same time were looking for, right? They were looking for like this sort of low calorie, skinnier way to indulge a little bit and have fun. And that model worked out really, really well. And, it does become tougher and tougher now because the person who has the sort of power to move the public is not as obvious as it was, 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, it was like, all right, who's on MTV? Like, who's got the number one record, right, in the country? Now that's not the case. I mean, even you got to find these people that, have this reach that's maybe not totally obvious. And then you got to find these folks before they, because now there's such an ecosystem for this, right? That, like if you want to do a deal with Joe Rogan like it's going to be really expensive, right? Number one podcast in the world. He was the host of Fear Factor a long time ago. Like nobody wanted to do a sponsorship with him when he was host of Fear Factor, but now he's got the number one podcast in the world. He reaches so many people, and he's going to be so expensive, unless you're a very, very big brand with a very, very big budget. It's going to be tough to do a long-term deal, to a real partnership. So it is about finding, that talent like in the rough too. I always thought the folks at, Body Armor were great at that. And Michael Fideli, who kind of ran partnerships, he was always good at like, you know what, he found Gronk, for Body Armor when the guy was a rookie. He's like, this guy's going to be star. He was always able to sort of kind of identify folks before they kind of, before they got super exposed. Patrick Mahomes, I think, at the end, and a couple other folks. He was just always able to sort of identify him. But yeah, the creator-led world is tough. I think the other thing, Josh, you sort of touched on it at the beginning of what we're talking about, is like one other thing about a creator-led brand that's dangerous to do is that if the brand is inextricably linked to the creator, it's going to be hard to sell. Like go back to Bloom. I think Bloom is like a great example of this done perfect. Like, Mari's has built this phenomenal funnel, marketing funnel with Bloom, but, it's not inextricably tied to her. It's its brand on its own. Mari just has this great story and this great podcast and this great following that all align with Bloom's like sort of ethos. But, Bloom is not her, like, right. It's not, well, first of all, it's not named Mari, it's named Bloom, it's named different, but like it identifies and in our consciousness, it sits aside. That's a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do because you're introducing consumers via that individual, and then to sort of build the brand in their minds separate apart from that, it's really tough. But like, if you want to do a deal with a creator these days, unless you are obviously that creator, but like if you're doing a deal with them, most all of them are whether it's themselves or their management or whatnot, they're going to be like, well, I need a timeline on this, right? Like I'm not doing this forever. I need a timeline. And so, like if you're partnering with someone and they only want to be in for 3-4 years, you need to be able to think about, all right, at the end of that time, right? If that person does not want to remain with the brand and they don't want to continue to push the brand and they don't want to continue to be a champion of the brand. By the way, if they're not signing up for doing so after a sale of the business, how am I going to position this company that it can stand on its own legs? And if I don't have an answer for that, it might be a reason to think about going to the partnership in the first place. Because, building something that ultimately the value is perceived in the creator or the athlete or the talent or the actor or whatever it is, that's not something that's going to translate to value for investors and founders and everybody else.
It's interesting. There's a few points there. I think, the key person risk. I think a lot of times you think about that as like there is some event bad that happens that like tears the business down. But I also think what you're kind of mentioning, like if there isn't a transitionary phase that you can transcend the strong connection between the creator and the actual brand, you're going to struggle because, to your point, when it gets acquired or whatever, like eventually that person probably doesn't want to be the figurehead forever, or the person that's like, whatever. So then you have to come up with that transitionary phase. And it's tough because at the beginning, maybe to break through some of the noise, you have to really be attached to the details of that brand that the creator does, because that's really what connects the creator, the product, and the audience, because those like, kind of like the inside stories or, those inside things, like those are the things that the fans really appreciate, those like kind of layers of it. I mean, like Prime does a really good job at like how some of their strategies, like with Logan Paul and KSI, like you could see that they put their fingerprints on some of those things because it really is aligned with them. But I also think that they've, arguably transcended, that's, maybe they're in that phase really that they're transitioning out of that, or at least they have a path to that. But there's another element of just the diminishing rate of returns where like every week it seems like another creator or a celebrity is doing this thing. So like how many can you buy just because you're having some parasocial relationship with a celebrity or a creator? Like I'm a weirdo. Like I rarely follow or really do anything with people that I don't know, but I know, just friends and like they have hundreds or thousands of celebrities or creators that they follow. And like you have some personal connection, or at least it's a one-sided personal connection, and you buy things because you want to like support them. But like how many can you do? Eventually, like after 10 of them or 20 of them, you're like, I can't keep up with all these subscriptions, or I can't keep up with all these things. Like I'm going to bankrupt myself because of this. So then, there's all those scenarios. And then another thing I was thinking about when you're talking about is like, you mentioned some of the gatekeepers, or like before it was television or just whatever. I think there was an element of the gatekeepers which was good, because I think there was an element of like sticking, like if they invested a bunch to like build up your name, they tend to probably continue to keep investing in you to like keep you up on this platform. Where today it's the algorithms, and the algorithms are extremely fickle. They are one of those things where they can make you a king or a queen in a matter of seconds, and then they could take it all away in a matter of minutes. Like it's just all of a sudden you're gone again. But for somebody that's on the other side that is trying to attach themselves to like these powerful people in the eyes of the algorithms, like those things shift so quickly that it becomes a little like it's fleeting. It's not as, it's tough. Like I think a lot of those things, like they just really haven't progressed to the point where we're going to see these like, big headlines, I guess of the pain headlines that people love to write about, like so-and-so raised all this money and then they bankrupted, and it was this big, million follower person or whatever it is. Like people get off on that. They love that kind of stuff. I don't know why, but that's just how they love to root for people that are failing. But I do think that's like a huge thing to think about, because it's not as sticky as it used to be. Like just because somebody got popular over a couple of maybe TikTok videos or something like
Yeah.
that, like that's much different than, being, a, say you said Kobe Bryant, or you said like any, like, these, they have a significant like amount of like, staying power because of, something that's not just that they had a nice, interesting dance on TikTok or something that like went them viral. And I'm not like knocking any of them, because I do think some of them are extremely powerful and are extremely, strong, and they've created some really impressive businesses. But I also think there's a little bit like we have to understand that those things are different. And since we're on the topic of TikTok, I think this is probably a topic that, again, from your perspective as a lawyer, like I think people are missing it, and maybe you can give some insights on this. Is like, especially when I'm talking about the type of CPG that I tend to probably focus a lot of my attention on. There are claims, there's some functionality to the product, there's something out there, and then you have, this commerce, I guess, arm of like TikTok Shop that then has creators that are out there and they're incentivized to sell, and they probably maybe are creating sensationalized claims, or they're using whatever, because they don't really know. I mean, a lot of people don't know the FTC rules of just general sponsorship stuff, let alone like when you get into like the structure function claims and things like that. So you get into this like weird phase where you obviously want to use it because there's a ton of attention and people are going on there, and obviously like TikTok is also incentivizing a lot of the customers' orders and like getting people to like try this out and get used to it. And you get excited and you start going, and you don't think about the risk layers. You just think about the positives and you go, I'm going to make it rich. And you don't think about the other side. But I'm seeing that could potentially be a big problem soon.
Yeah. Well, so I want to say one thing on the creators that you kind of touched on before I go to TikTok. So I do think what's absolutely table stakes these days, because you can't control the algorithm and whatnot, is that when you really partner with a creator or talent or whatnot, like they've got to be ready to approach it like a business person, like a true partner. And Kobe Bryant was so successful. Like they didn't really have a lot of like marketing stuff with him. They didn't have a ton of Kobe like POS, but Kobe like came to all the videos that they filmed, and he sat in and was like pseudo creative director like him lining things up and be like, hey, make it look like this. And like Kobe would go to the distributor meetings
Hmm.
with Mike, and he would pitch body armor to these folks that like, blue collar guys and 4 hours out of LA and like never thought they'd meet celebrity, and Kobe Bryant walks in on a Monday morning
Yeah.
to pitch about body armor. Like that plays. Authenticity is what plays now. And consumers are so much smarter at sniffing it out that if the person you're partnering with is not willing to get their hands dirty, right? And not like, and they're treating the partnership like a job on the consumer facing side, and not like a partnership where they kind of got to live it and breathe it to the extent they can. Um, I don't think it's going to work. Not in today's. And then the TikTok stuff, man. So like today is it's so interesting because like social media keeps upping the speed at which information moves, right? You look at like a Facebook to an Instagram to TikTok, like the rates at which you post, the length of time things are up, like just the sheer volume of information you're exposed to just keeps getting bigger and bigger and faster, right? And it does create one of the biggest opportunities for obviously misinformation, right? Like this is something that we're talking about in the political realm, but just in all forms of advertising, just misinformation, whether it's intentional or not, right? And I do think the FTC has not 100% caught up with the way people are actually utilizing social media these days. And I do think that it does create a lot of opportunities for a lot of people to put things that aren't true out there. Now they try like this. Sometimes you can't use certain keywords and all this type of stuff, but like, when you're talking about like doing a story and having a link and you're passing this out to like 1,000 creators and they're making a video about it, it does lead to a lot of misinformation. From a company standpoint, I think what is super important, and I think has to be done, is when you're engaging in one of these sort of like, revenue share type, we're going to pass this out to a ton of creators and ask you to make a video about it. You got to give them great messaging points. You got to give them great guidelines on what to say about the product and not to say about it. I think it's the company's responsibility. And right now, it's offending information of some third party and it gets taken down. But I do think, until like there becomes much more clarity and like a straight line type of liability for these companies for stuff that's kind of like put out there through affiliates, you're not going to see people clamp down really hard because, look, I mean, like you said, everybody's fighting this algorithm, and they're just trying to get to the top, and it's very easy to lose sight of, hey, would you put this on your website? Would you put this in print? When we're talking about, a TikTok story that, might be relevant for a couple days or not, if it's trying to go viral, or an Instagram story that's going to be on for 24 hours. But yeah, I mean, look, I think it's talk about the Wild West, and that's where it exists right now in CPG and our ability to sort of market, spread info.
Well, I know we could keep talking about probably for a few hours, but I think we both have some hard stops here. So, Ryan, I want to just thank you for all the insights, time, conversation. I thought it was great. We'll definitely have to have you come on again soon, but thanks again.
Josh, thanks for having me, man. This was great. I really enjoyed the talk, and happy to come on whenever you want me.
I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. If you did, consider that like button to support me. Also, help me get to my new short-term goal of 4,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. I'd love to see you join me on this journey, but we need to fix the fact that slightly more than 90% of you that are watching this YouTube video right now are not subscribed to my channel, and that makes me extremely sad. But I do want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.